The Gazette did a really interesting deep dive on Terrasse Gate, the Grand Prix fiasco on Peel Street. And joining us now is Michelle Lalonde, who co-wrote the piece. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Dan.
Thanks for joining us. What struck me about this piece is not only how much work you guys put into it, and it's really fantastic in that sense, but how there's quite a bit of blame to go around.
Yep. When we, first there was the whole video that went online and went viral with Sandra Ferreira of her cafe on Peel Street, really upset and understandably upset because she had been shut down in the middle of a very busy evening, busiest weekend of the year for those restaurant terraces on Peel Street. And, the city came out, or the city came out on Monday and sort of blamed the two fire prevention officers who were involved in shutting it down. But it just seemed a little bit too outrageous to us that it would just be these two people who decided to do that. And so we decided to look into it a little further by doing access to information requests.
Well, we're really glad that you did, Michelle, because it's a great article. By the way, it reads a lot like a case study, the kind of case studies that we get in business school. By the way, management case study. Because,
love the timeline, very thorough.
Yeah, the timeline is great. It's almost like a mini detective novel. So there's different parties here. You've got Montreal Centre-Ville, who's advocating on behalf of the businesses. You have the restaurateurs themselves. You have the borough of Ville-Marie, and you have the fire department. And when my takeaway, when I read your piece, is that all of these entities were essentially working independently of one another, and everybody thought they were communicating, but it's like one of those games of broken telephone, isn't it?
It really was. And, one of the big problems, I think, was that the fire prevention people didn't really get in on the game until pretty late. That the merchants had been advised way back in July of 2023 that the rules would be different this year because we were going to have traffic on the street, on Peel Street, which Peel has been closed in the past for the Grand Prix sometimes so they could put their tents out and they had lots of space, but they had been warned there'd be less space because there had to be traffic on Peel Street this year. But that, and that started back in July of 2023, but throughout the spring of 2024, they were kind of warned repeatedly that they couldn't take up as much room, that they'd have to, be careful about all the regulations by the borough. But they really didn't get talking to the fire department until quite late in the game. But the fire department was quite clear, and by May 23rd was telling them, you have to move your terraces. They're too close to the buildings. They didn't move them. The fire department said they'd come back on May 27th. That official did not come back. And for some reason, the merchants thought they could just leave them where they were. And that's what we were trying to find out, is why they thought that. And it just turns out to be really a lack of communication between all of those players that you mentioned, Justine.
But Michelle, they couldn't move them because the city was telling them that they were already taking up too much room in the street. So the fire department was saying, move them further away from the building, and the city was saying, move them further away from the street. So it seems to me they just threw their hands up.
Right. They were supposed to have smaller terraces this year. That's the problem. And they just
Ideally.
really didn't. So, I think that they thought they were maybe wishful thinking that the fire department would turn a blind eye, but the fire department didn't really have a choice when they came back and saw that they still hadn't moved them, They had to have them removed completely. Had to have the people, that's a terrible thing that happened, but everybody had to leave the terraces on that busy night. So, and then we got a big black eye, the city did, for the whole Grand Prix being, there were other problems with the Grand Prix that were not on Peel Street, but, the city looked bad. And it turns out that, yes, if all of these players had communicated better, it certainly wouldn't have happened.
Now, in terms of the violation themselves, I believe I heard some of the restaurant owners saying that we're talking about centimeters or violations that were fairly minor. Is that what you found as well, or were these, very obvious violations? And perhaps did the restaurateurs think they could get away with it because it was so minor?
Yeah, it's hard to know why they thought they could leave them where they were. Some were, inches off, some were feet off. But at one point, they were really blocking the roadway to the point where a car did hit one of the terraces, and that terrace did make adjustments. The others apparently didn't make the adjustments properly. And then the whole issue of the canopies being too close to the building is a different story, and that's a fire prevention regulation, and nobody wants people in Montreal, certainly nobody wants to be arguing with fire regulations in Montreal after what happened in old Montreal. with the Airbnb fire, the fire prevention officers are really saying, like, we have rules and we don't argue about them. It's not the restaurant owners that are going to argue fire prevention officers out of them, and I get that. But in the end, those fire prevention officers were not disciplined for closing down the terraces. They were disciplined, one of them for being, not being professional with the restaurant owners when they objected, and another one for not coming back after he said he would after that May 23rd visit where he said, listen, these are too close to the building, and they were told to move them by May 27th, and they didn't.
So a number of key dates that you bring up in your article: May 23rd, and then May 23rd when the inspection happened, May 27th when they were supposed to come back and didn't, and then June 7th when they actually showed up. And I guess the missing piece, if we were to really get to the end and solve this mystery case here, the missing piece is, why did they decide to show up on June 7th when the terraces were full, late in the evening at a time when they knew that there would be a lot of clients? And why did they ask everybody to leave immediately if there was no immediate danger of fire breaking out?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's really a mystery, because the fire department, they did explain that this was a regular blitz that they do 4 times a year on, there's a history here. All of the restaurants in downtown Montreal and all over Montreal, there are rules they have to follow that are fire rules. And often on these big events, Christmas and the Halloween and the Grand Prix, these are times when the bars tend to overload. Sometimes they let too many people in. They tend to, this is when the fire department has to do these blitzes. That's what they explained to me, is that we have these blitzes because we want that even when it's busy, they have to follow these fire department rules. So when they got there and realized that there was, still this problem, that they hadn't moved their canopies further away from the building, I don't think the fire prevention officer then has a choice about acting at that point. They had been warned and they didn't do it. It is, that this is what the fire prevention people were saying to us was, look, we can't, if there is a problem the next day, it's us who has to explain why we didn't enforce our own rules. So you can see their point of view. Fire prevention officers are all about fire prevention. They have rules and they want them to be followed. And it does look like these merchants were warned many, many times. I mean, what we couldn't find out in access to information requests is whether there may have been phone calls, people meeting, and telling, someone may have told them, look, it's okay, we'll leave you alone. It's very unlikely, though. The fire department has said repeatedly that no one from fire prevention told the merchants that it was okay to leave them there, but there might have been misunderstandings between what are borough rules and what are fire department rules. But, I think that our investigation really shows that they were warned. They were told. Emails were sent. Meetings were had. And the missing piece is, why didn't they follow the rules why didn't they do what the fire department asked them to do on May 23rd? Why did they leave things as they were till June 7th?
Michelle Lalonde, reporter with the Montreal Gazette, with Andy Riga. They write this behind-the-scenes scenario of how Grand Prix weekend turned into a fiasco on Peel Street. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Michelle.